So here we go. Welcome to this month's webinar, Wearing Too Many Hats, How to Solve Being Too Busy. Before we go any further, I do want to thank our sponsors. They help make this possible. There are expenses involved in all of this. And so Nationwide Video, AV Stumpfel USA, Complete Crewing, Flex Rental Solutions, HireTrack, and Digital Projection have all contributed to AV Matters to help make this kind of event possible. I am still your presenter, Tom Stimson, president of Stimson Group. I'm a business consultant and advisor to the AV industry. And there's all my websites and pages and email, and on there, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I actually love hearing from you guys. I love answering questions. I like talking to you on Facebook. So don't be shy. Happy to chat with you. All right, why are we having this webinar? So the question, probably the number one question, I get lots of great questions, but the number one question I get from business owners is, why can't we grow? And the answer is, you're too busy. And if I find that you're too busy, that's pretty much the sum total. Busy is not the same as growth. So many companies who can't grow, it is because they are perpetually too busy. And we need to solve this too busy problem, because it's self-imposed. And let's look a little bit at what too busy looks like. If you're the type of company that finds that you have important initiatives that are always on hold, there's always big projects that you need to get to. We need to redo our pricing. We need to start a newsletter. We need to do some marketing. We need to hold an open house. We need to clean our cases. Whatever it might be, if you're not getting around to those things, you're too busy. And that's a problem. You should be able to do those things. If you have maintenance projects that only get done in the free time, and I am actually making air quotes with my fingers right now, or when we're slow, if that's when you do maintenance, then you are too busy, and that's also a problem. If you have employees that tend to reject new responsibility and new advancement because it's more work instead of replacing work that they're already doing, you're too busy. Right? If here's my favorite question. If I ask you, on the busiest day of the year, the biggest project, the biggest events, all the stuff is going on, how many people are in your office? And if you look at me and honestly say, no one's in the office, maybe the bookkeeper, unless we have her running to the airport to make a shipment. If the office empties when you're busy, you are too busy. Again, this is a problem. This is what's going to keep you from growing. If all of your problems seem to stem from needing more people, if you go, man, if we just had more people, everything would be okay, then you're too busy. And if your answer to that question is, well, we can't afford more people, then you're definitely too busy. So how do we find busy? Now I can have a conversation and we can talk about a few things and I can determine that you're busy, but your financials will tell me you're busy. The quick way to do a quick assessment on your financials is if I look at all of your direct labor costs, all of your cost of goods sold labor, and you may have some labor costs that are below the line that belong above the line. We can look at that, add that up. So that's your inside and outside direct labor. That includes your subcontractors, it includes your warehouse team, your installers, your technicians, your crews, your project managers. All of these are direct labor. Add up the cost you spend for all of that and compare that to your labor income number. And I'm not going to wait for you to do this. Go do this after the meeting. Have a bucket nearby because you're going to be sick. You're going to be very surprised to find out that you are spending more to get the work done than you're actually taking in. And that is the first indication I have that I'm going to be dealing with a company that is symptomatically too busy. Another way we can find out too busy is we can do process mapping. We can follow an order through the system, see how you do things. That will tell me a lot about where the busyness comes from. How many times does somebody touch something that creates busyness? How many, if there's one person that every process goes through, I guarantee you're too busy because you've created this giant bottleneck. And we can do this process mapping by doing employee interviews. I could talk to employees about how they get their work done, and I count how many times I hear a certain name. So If I ask your employees, and I do the interview thing, and those of you who know the movie Office Space will remember these guys, these are the Bobs, and they say, what would you say you do here? If I ask this question, here are the answers that I get from a company that's too busy. And these are very typical. And I've cataloged this for years. Here are like the top 6 or 7 questions or answers that I get to that question, what do you do here? The number one answer I get is, what don't I do? And what don't I do usually comes early in the interview process, because I'm talking to people who have been with the company the longest. They're usually higher up on the org chart. This is typically a longtime employee who has no real job description. They just do all the things that they're good at, and nobody ever formalized this. So their answer is, what don't I do? Another popular answer I'll get is, well, it depends. And it depends tells me I'm probably dealing with somebody who's not really sure who his or her manager is. And that's going to lead to a lot of inherent busyness, because they don't know who they're working for, so they don't know what they should be doing, so they can't prioritize, which creates bottlenecks in the system, which creates this whole atmosphere of busyness. Then I get I do a little bit of everything, which is one of the ones that sends gets all the hairs on the back of my neck to start to stand up a bit, because that's typically what a person who's guarding a kingdom that they've created for themselves. They do a little bit of everything, because that's how they control things that are going on around them. And they're not necessarily nefarious. We've just not done a good job of redirecting their energy to things that would help other people be less busy. Another great answer I get is, well, my job description says I do this, but, and they always pause dramatically. And I typically find that this is the person in the organization that doesn't like rules or process. And it might be an indication that the rules and processes that are there are not helping the company be efficient. They're trying to do something else. They're trying to prevent from spending money. They're trying to hold people accountable. I'm making those air quotes with my fingers again, or do something else that doesn't really help the process and doesn't really help us do a good job for the customers. This is always a good answer. What do I do, or what does my boss think I do? And yes, we have people in our companies who feel underappreciated, and that's generally where they start that conversation. And then this all comes down to, and I get insightful people who say, look, Tom, I wear a lot of hats. This is where I'm going to get my best information, and this is where this particular webinar has come from. I've got an employee that's just trying to make things work. So they wear whatever hat they need to be wearing at the moment to keep things going. They're doing the right thing, but we haven't done a good job as management of reducing the hats that they wear to reduce the bottlenecks that need to be undone. We've got bottlenecks. There's a person trying to do the right thing. They're taking on all the hats that are being neglected. So I won't say that this person is always a hero, but very often it's the hero in the organization. And that's a very honest answer, and it's a very helpful answer. So this led to my whole theory of hats. And some of you know that I've done this webinar at least 4 times now, because I think it's really important. So let me explain what the theory of hats is. All right. We all wear a lot of hats, but every employee can have only one primary hat at a time. A primary hat is the job that you cannot say no to. It's your job. It's nobody else's. You have to stop what you're doing and take care of it. Now, your hat priority can change depending on the circumstances, and you have a primary hat in one situation, but a different one in another situation, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Now, in order to have more than one primary hat, those hats have to occur at distinctly different and predictable times. I'll give you an example here in just a minute of what that looks like. So you could have multiple primary hats, but they can't really be in conflict with each other on a consistent basis. Now, we have primary hats, but we also have secondary hats, and secondary hats always have a flexible execution schedule. Okay, you could say later to a secondary hat demand. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, I need you to do this, you say, I can do that, but it's going to be in an hour or 2 hours because I'm working on this thing. As opposed to a primary hat where you probably need to stop what you're doing and work on it, at least metaphorically. A good example, a bookkeeper, a person who's a bookkeeper, they do HR, they do payroll, very typical in a small organization. You got less than 25 employees, you probably have this person. And they have three primary hats. Now, primary hat is time sensitive. It has to occur at a certain time. One is deadline sensitive. It has to be completed by a certain time. And one is urgency sensitive. In other words, it's reactionary. It has to happen when it has to happen. So let's see if you, perhaps you think you know what each one is, but I'll tell you. The time sensitive one is payroll. Most companies, payroll has to be submitted in a certain window of time. We have to complete the pay period. We have to collect the hours. We have to get it to the payroll company in time to get them checks cut by X date. That's a time sensitive hat. So very often, whatever day that is, the person who's in charge of payroll, you don't want to bother them, right? The deadline sensitive one is being a bookkeeper. So we got to, we do monthly books. We got to close out the books at the end of the month, hopefully by the 10th of the month or the 15th. And I know some of you owners right now are going, are you kidding? You can get your books closed that quickly? Yes, you can. Call me. Let's talk about it. So I get my books closed. That's deadline sensitive. Okay. HR is urgency sensitive. I have to do HR when I'm onboarding a new employee. I have to do HR when an employee is having an issue, a medical leave, having a challenge with the insurance company. These things are very high priority and they have to be dealt with pretty much in real time. So you can have three primary hats, but they don't all conflict all the time. So we're safe having one person doing those three things most of the time. So let's talk about some other jobs in your company, and we'll look at the breakdown of the hats. So if I'm working with systems integrators, particularly companies that are probably less than $30 million in projects per year, they have a system designer. He's the MacGyver of the company. We're going to call him Fred, and Fred designs and estimates all the major projects. He's the best programmer. He's proficient in AutoCAD, and he's all these. He does the liaison with the manufacturers. He's the only one who knows how to do esoteric things like make the customer resource, software work with the D-Tools software. And oh, by the way, he knows how to program the phone system. And he's the computer network administrator because he installed it 10 years ago, which means he's also desktop support for most of the office because he's the best computer guy in the company. And he keeps all the passwords. That's a lot of hats. This is typical. I find Fred all the time, right? So his hats conflict. He's got a lot of primary hats. They conflict in location, timing, and process. This is typically the I do a little bit of everything guy. He's got a big kingdom he's created. It's hard to get him to let go. There are very important things that don't happen when they need to. We don't get maintenance on the network. The network goes down, and he's nowhere around to do anything about it. In spite of all this, Fred doesn't want to give up anything, which is also typical of this role. But the point is, as management, we need to figure out how to do this. We need to find other resources to move these hats around so that things can get the attention that they want. And your rationale and your reasoning is, I've got multiple things that have to happen at the same time in the same place, and you're in other places at other times. So we've got to solve this problem. I'm going to give you another person, a project coordinator in a live event. They're basically inside support personnel. They are, they're managing the show calendar. They're assigning technicians. Maybe they're doing travel. They're hiring subcontractors. And because they are that kind of admin sort of person, they order parts and supplies. They generate purchase orders. Because they're booking staff, they're doing timesheet reviews, and of course that means they're doing expense reports. Maybe they do job cost report compilations. I find this particular role quite a bit as well. And no, by the way, because she happens to be female, she answers the phone on lunch on Tuesday and Thursday, but that's a whole nother discussion about how the AV industry is still a little bit misogynistic. But we'll talk about that on another day. So Mary wears too many hats. And the problem with the hats that Mary's wearing is that everything is equally urgent. Okay. This is often I wear a lot of hats person. She's trying to do the right thing, so she's taking on these hats. They're all urgent. She's constantly busy. She doesn't take lunch breaks. She comes in early. She stays late. Most of the things that Mary is doing have concrete deadlines. They have that in common. Other people are always dependent upon her to get something done so that they can do their work. Okay. All of these things have a common starting point, which is the confirmed order. So automatically we have a bottleneck. So an order is confirmed, and all of a sudden Mary has all these tasks that she needs to do. So she becomes a bottleneck in the process, and that's something that we need to address. And I'll give you one more person. We got the old rental warehouse manager. Let's call him Joe. He supervises and schedules crew, organize the warehouse. They do, show prep. They check in and check out, do quality control, order supplies, the whole bit. Of course, emergency orders, nights and weekend stuff, the usual things. So on a good day, he can do most of those things. Okay. Now, this is often the guy who will tell me that he does more than his boss thinks he does, and he tends to feel underappreciated. Well, because they're behind the wall and we don't see them working their butts off all the time. In this kind of role, the first hat is always the emergency. So whatever emergency or fire is burning, that's what they have to deal with first. So they have a lot of things that are deadline driven, lots of priorities that they're juggling with emergencies sprinkled in. And he will feel like he needs a bigger team to support him in order to avoid some of these conflicts and have resources to send out for all of that. Now, sometimes we find people who have self-inflicted hat overloads. And while our Fred guy, the design engineer, is probably self-inflicted, everybody else just seems to be doing something that's fairly normal in our industry. So when we talk about undoing these conflicts, which is really the goal of our conversation here today, or at least the lecture today, is how do we undo these conflicts? How do we start moving hats around so that people have a nice balance of first and secondary hats, so more things are achievable, which means that we need to shift primary responsibilities to people who may not have any right now. Now, you may be thinking, well, I have to hire people to do this, and that may not necessarily be true, though sometimes it is. The biggest challenge is you're going to have to start with the people who have hoarded jobs, and they tend to be the employees that have been there the longest. There was a time where they had to do all of the jobs because there was only 5 of you in the company, and they still remember those times. Sometimes they don't want to let go for personal reasons. Sometimes they don't trust other people to do it. Sometimes they're just heroes and they have hero syndrome. We have to help them unwind this. Sometimes they create kingdoms and silos, which is a little bit more nefarious because they're trying to create job security. They're trying to make themselves indispensable. Maybe they want to enjoy the prestige or the power and the control of a role, which is counterproductive generally to the best interests of the organization. So as an outsider, advising these situations, I'm generally more sensitive to self-inflicted kingdoms and silos because they are self-serving. They're not trying to serve the organization, as opposed to our project coordinator, Mary, where she's simply wearing as many hats as she needs to take care of the things that are falling in her lap. I need to bring up a point right now very much, is that if there is a hat overload, if we have a bad distribution of hats, management is complicit. Management allows this to happen. This is not always a process issue in an organization. This is really a leadership issue. So we have let people take on too much. We've let them take on conflicting hats, and we haven't solved it. Remember my mantra, my manifesto: management's job is to remove obstacles. And somebody having conflicting hats is an obstacle, and management needs to identify that and remove that, which again is what we're here about today. We want you to pay attention to these things. And we say these things, and I've heard every one of these things. Management is complicit because she's the best person to do the job, therefore she should do all of these things. Or, he can do the network stuff. It only takes a minute. Why should I have to spend extra money when we have somebody here who can do the job? That's my favorite. Oh, he likes doing those things. He really enjoys that. We should let him do it. And then there's the always, well, you can get to it later. And all of these things lead to the problems that you can't grow your business because you're always too busy, because your key personnel have too many hats and they are process constraints in and of themselves. They become bottlenecks in the process. Now, let's talk about solving this. If you find that you are too busy and you're seeing these symptoms in yourself and you want to figure out how can we start to unwind this, then here's the process you follow. List the job roles for all of your key employees, every one of them. They need to help you do this and you need to remind them of things, but you would be amazed at how many things people think they do. And I can tell you from experience that you will have several people who think that their key responsibility is the same thing. And they're all treating it as a priority when actually we only need one of them to do it. So there's some low-hanging fruit for you. Sometimes we have people who are taking responsibility for things that you've already outsourced and they've just never accepted the fact that you've done that. So again, you will find some low-hanging fruit if you'll just get people to list all of the job roles and you sit down and do some analysis and comparison on that. Once they've done those job roles, sit down with them and identify primary and secondary hats. In other words, what are the constraints we can reduce in this? And so you can talk about the conflicting primary hats that are creating the bottleneck. And then your goal is to reassign. Now, with a long-time employee, I'm often going to give them a choice of saying, well, would you rather do this or would you rather do this? But sometimes I need them to do a specific job. And the conversation that happens quite often is to say, well, look, if I only get to do this one job, I'm not going to be happy. Great. Let me find some secondary hats that you can wear instead of multiple primary hats. So we want to reassign to another employee who is not going to be as good as the person you're talking to, okay, but we can still let them try the job, or we can outsource. And a lot of the things that we are tied up with as businesses grow, it's actually better. We're better off outsourcing than we are hiring another employee. And then once you've moved a resource or once you've moved a hat, you have to redefine your internal processes so people know how to access that resource. Particularly if it's an outside resource, they need to know what the conduit is and how to fit all of that in. So those are the primary steps for working through this. Now, again, ask questions anytime you want, type them in there and I will get to them, but I know I'm on a roll here. So I want to talk a little bit about constraints. Because when I talk about bottlenecks and constraints, I want to make sure that we all understand what they are. So a bottleneck is something that's going to hold you back. And the easy thing for us all to relate to is traffic, right? When we're looking at a bottleneck, we're looking at the cost of capacity versus the cost of delays. So I can eliminate a bottleneck, but typically I would have to add a lot of resources. And the question is the cost worth it? So here's the example, and I want you to think about this. Maybe you're with a group of folks and you can talk about this. How would you solve a problem in which you got 3 lanes of traffic going each direction and 2 lanes get blocked through a breakdown or an accident? So now I've got a bottleneck. I've got a traffic jam. What's the right way to solve this? In the moment, this is a real-time bottle jam. How can we solve this? So think about that for a second. Now, when I've done this exercise with teams, here's how the answers typically come back to me. The owner of the company says, well, delays happen. Just wait, you'll get past it, and then you'll move on and you'll drive faster. The sales team will say, the solution is simple. We just need to add 3 more lanes. Operations says, I think we need to change the expected arrival time. And then management will say, why doesn't everybody just drive faster? Let's all speed up at the same time and everything will be fine. All right, they're all right and they're all wrong. The constraint here is the number of lanes. Is it practical to add more lanes? And of course, we can't do it instantly. So we're going to have to live with a certain amount of constraint. We're never going to have perfect throughput. So let me take this to you from another direction. I'm going to give you a manufacturing example, which is really where constraint theory comes from, by the way. So say you make widgets for a living. And the question is, how many widgets can I make? So you have 3 machines that makes the parts for the widgets. And machine A can make 100 units a day, machine B could make 150 parts a day, and machine C makes 75 parts a day. So how many widgets can you make, right? You can make 75 widgets a day because your constraint is machine C. Make sense? All right, think about this with people. Let's expand this. How can I make more widgets? Okay, well, obvious answer is I add another machine. So I added another machine C, so I should be able to double my output, except, well, no, I can't, because now all I've done is moved the constraint. I can make 100 units because machine A constrains me to 100 units per day. So this is constraint theory in a nutshell. And what we have the opportunity to do as leaders and managers is continually move our constraint to a higher value to create more capacity in our organization so we can grow. And if you're too busy to make the changes, then you need to get some help, which is, again, another conversation. Some of the things that will help the people I've worked with in the past is changing their thinking about what they can and cannot change. The biggest obstacle I've run into to moving hats around is that we often believe and we often tell ourselves we need to have the best person do the job. And oftentimes, particularly in small companies, I have one person who's the best at everything. Seems rather illogical that they should do everything, but yet we see things that are almost that way. We need to become comfortable with the second best person owning the job or doing the process. We have to change our tolerance for mistakes. You need capacity for mistakes. Going back to the traffic diagram, I've got 3 lanes. Can my entire traffic system tolerate a 2-lane breakdown? If 2-lane breakdowns are what are normal, then perhaps I need to have 4 lanes in order to be an efficient flow of traffic. So think about your organization. Emergency surprises and, oh, by the ways, are normal in our industry. So you need the capacity that provides for those mistakes. So your people are going to make mistakes. There's nothing we can do to prevent it. Working harder to prevent it doesn't necessarily give you the yield that prevention should bring you. Learn to tolerate some mistakes. And very often, I can help organizations save money by putting more people on. And the resistance to adding people is often misplaced. Because if people bring you efficiency, yes, they add cost, but if they add efficiency, the cost is often absorbed in the efficiency. At the same time, you're creating capacity, which allows you to have more throughput, which will recreate the problem in which you need to add more people so that you can create more efficiency. So growing a business is very much about counterintuitively adding people when you don't have any money, because that's the way that you're going to have money so that you can do more business and have more money so you can have that problem again. So as long as you're growing, you're going to have to continually add people in order to keep your costs under control. Artificially holding down cost by reducing people is typically creating the problem that we're talking about here today. Now, individuals, for you, many of you who are wearing a lot of hats, and oftentimes it's the business owners I'm talking to, they can't figure out how to get out of working in their business so that they have time to work on it. They have to de-hat their role. So here's some of the things that we can do for ourselves. Look at your list. Go back to that list we made at the beginning of all the things, all the processes that you personally manage, and consider where you are making the most valuable contribution. Not in terms of you are doing it the best, is that getting this work done is worth a lot of money. And get yourself down to a primary and a secondary hat that complements what you're already doing. In other words, it easily fits into the work cycle of what you're doing. And I'll show you an example in just a minute. Now, you have to go identify viable replacements for your other roles that are conflicting. And moving a primary hat from yourself to someone else might overload them with primary hats, but guess what? They can do their own dehatting. They get to do the same process. And we're going to shift the hats around, and you may end up with a bunch of secondary hats, but if we reduce your primary hats, we're going to increase throughput. And don't forget, outsourcing is an option. So we can outsource a lot more things today than we could have 10 or even 5 years ago. Now that we've identified where the work's going to go, you need to propose a training and transfer plan with a timeline. And then the bonus exercise here is actually do the math. Do the math on the improvement of inefficiency. Everyone in your organization has a dollar value per hour. I don't care how you're paid, because what you're worth does not necessarily have anything to do with what you're paid. For any job in your company, any hat that you're doing, there's a price of outsourcing that. That is the dollar value. So if you're a design engineer for a system design for an integration company, the outsource price on that's probably 150 or 200 bucks an hour. Guess what? That's your value. If you're doing tasks where the outsourcing is worth $50 an hour, we're upside down. You're not spending time in your most valuable role. So let's go back to our buddy Fred, the system designer, and look at all the things that he does. And he goes through this exercise of analyzing what his primary hat should be, the one thing that no one else can do, and the complementary hat that goes with it. So he's got to do the sales support and the design, because those two things go hand in hand, and that becomes his primary hat. He always has to have time available to do these things. But he needs a secondary hat as well that can work in what we would call as flexible time. And if it's complementary, that's even better. So the logical thing on his list is to make him the manufacturer liaison and the new product advocate, because these are the things that are getting woven into the design. All the other stuff Fred does, could be outsourced or assigned to somebody else. So these can be his primary and secondary hats. And we're going to dramatically increase the throughput of our most valuable per hour employee, which, oh, by the way, is determining the size of our pipeline and how much work we need to do. I'll run another example. I'll take a show technician position. And, they set and operate the show, they collaborate on future events, they do training, they support sales, they sometimes prep their orders, maybe they drive the truck. Whole litany of things that might be asked to do. Where is their highest value? The thing that you can't change is setting and operating the show and doing the paperwork that goes with it. No one else can do this. So their primary hat is set and operate the show and fill out the paperwork and reports and time cards that go with it so we can bill it and make some money. Okay, that's a non-negotiable. Hat number 2 is they can collaborate on future events, participate in training, basically be a subject matter expert within the organization, be involved in conversations about a new equipment you're going to buy, that sort of thing. That's a secondary hat, which has very flexible timing, but it's also very valuable and complementary to what their primary hat is. The other things that they're doing, we can take one person, say for instance, you have 5 show technicians, and they're all responsible for supporting sales and getting involved in meetings and doing all this planning stuff. If we can consolidate all of those third hats into one person's job who acts in that role on behalf of everybody else, you've either added one person or you've reassigned a person. And typically, if I've got 5 techs and I limit their primary hats to what I've got on the screen here, I could probably now do the job with 3.5 techs. Let's call it 4. One takes on all the other roles. All right. So we can shift the jobs around. We just reallocate the primaries, and we have somebody else do a lot more of the secondary roles. So again, this is really all about reducing constraints, right? So I'm going to reduce the workload on my most valuable players. That's going to increase my capacity for high-level work, which means high value. Okay. I want to keep most of my MVP work in-house because that will help facilitate the selling of the type of work that we do. That's the most difficult thing to outsource. And what makes this work is information sharing tools, is transparency. So we all use software to run our businesses. We need to use software to be a transparency tool that shares information and allows more people to act without having to go through another person to get things done. So I could talk about that for hours, but if human beings are the bottleneck, let the software free up the resources to allow multiple people to act on the information that's available. And then the other thing that will help you in all of this is fix your labor margins. I don't know what it is, and I've been, consulting in this space for over a dozen years now, and I've been writing and promoting and teaching in this space for even longer than that. I don't know what our aversion is to labor margins. So that exercise about comparing your labor income to your direct labor expense, do that. You need a wake-up call. We are underselling. You need to sell labor at a higher margin, even if it means you need to sell equipment at a lower margin. You will be better off if you do. It will make your business scalable. That in and of itself is an entire another webinar. Let me plug that in there while we're at it, all right? Now, I retooled somebody's job, and every time you change somebody's job description, for some reason they want a raise, even if you make their job easier. I don't know what it is. So match the pay to the job. The typical example that I deal with is, the show technicians that have to prep their own orders, and it's often presented to me as they need to pack their own parachute. They won't make any mistakes because they'll be paying attention because it's their butt on the line. And I understand the logic in that, but it's a very small company thinking. And we're taking somebody who is highly paid and highly skilled and having them do a job that is actually rote if you break it down into its true steps. So you can hire one really good technician to prep all the orders, and now you have a really smart technician and you've solved the problem and you've increased the throughput of the remaining technicians. You can give this person some less expensive support personnel because sometimes you need, a couple of bodies at the same time. And it also allows you to start training from within. So this is probably another one of those things that we need to rethink about our businesses, change our mindset, is that you don't need an MVP to do all the work that an MVP can do. We can train this stuff. We can move it down. We can have MVPs doing things for other MVPs, and it'll work just fine, and you'll be more efficient. All right. I'm going to give you an exercise to do. We're going to get to Q&A here in just a few minutes, but I'm going to give you an exercise to do after this webinar is over. All right. You ready? Name someone in your company that everyone needs to go through. We know who it is. There's that person who everybody interacts with every single day. Answer the question, what is that person doing when they are not available to others? Okay, what are they doing? What do you do when that person is not available to you? And could someone else do that? That's the basic part of the exercise. Now, track a process that you use every day that goes through that person. How many times does that process touch the same person? Do these two exercises, and what you'll end up with is a spider diagram where a whole bunch of lines go through one person, and the same line will go through the same person multiple times. So it'll leave them, go to another person, and then come back to them. Look at where your concentration is. This is where you're going to have a hat problem. This is where you can make a significant impact in your business, reduce the stress and anxiety of a person who's powering through it, create more resources for the rest of the team so they can have more throughput in their jobs, which is going to allow you to do more business because you're eliminating the constraints in your organization. If you can do more business, I'm thinking you're probably going to grow. And if you grow, you're probably going to make more money. And oh, by the way, when you reduce constraints, you're reducing costs. So these two things, if you want to grow and make more money, focus on these constraints, redistribute these jobs to make more sense, and I think you'll be amazed at the impact it'll have on your bottom line. Now, I suspect that there's going to be a question or two, and I see a couple of that are popping up already. So please type in something in the Q&A panel. I'm going to sidebar here for just a minute, then I'm going to come back to those questions and get you back to your work because I'm sure you're all busy. Hey, yes, Jumpstart Workshops. We have one coming up in May 15th and 16th. This will be our operations workshop. We have marketing in August. We have management in December. We are looking for some dates to schedule another sales workshop, probably the last week of October as things start to wind down a little bit. If you think there's a better time, let me know and I'll certainly take a look at it. But the operations workshop is closing soon, so you need to get registered. Go to my website. You can go to the Jumpstart page, or you can go to the workshop page through the menu system, and you'll find a link to the information. If you're not getting my emails, in other words, if this workshop is a surprise to you, and I don't know how you got onto this webinar if you're not getting my emails, then you need to sign up for my mailing list. So while you're at my website, make sure you're on the mailing list. I'm not going to send you 2 emails because you registered twice. Don't worry about that. If you register, I'll also send you my free ebook, which is an ebook. So if you delete it, well, I'll never know. Or you can buy it on Amazon if that's really important to you. But the important thing is that you'll get you on my Intentional Success newsletter, which comes every Monday morning. Nice piece of advice in there. While you're at my website, if you'd like to have a conversation about implementing anything that you've learned in a webinar or from a newsletter or blog post, I'd be happy to chat with you about it. I'm very generous with my time. I'm not going to send you a bill. I'd love to hear what your questions are and help you in any way I can, because it's kind of what I live for. If we get a chance to do some business together down the road, that's great too. But you know what? I'm thrilled if you just come to a workshop, because that's a great way to get to know each other and start learning some of the value in what I do and what you can do for yourself. We're doing a webinar every month, folks. They're very thematic. I consider this an operations webinar because we've got an operations workshop coming up. Our next webinar is going to be about business development. It'll be on May 30th. You'll be able to register for that webinar, basically as soon as I get done with this one and update the website. So take a look at that. You'll get an email, promotional email, to remind you to sign up for it as well. But if you want to mark it on your calendar now, it'll be at this same time on May 30th. One more quick shout out to our sponsors. Thanks, guys. And let's get to some questions. All right, for such a large audience, you're pretty thin on the questions, but this is a good one. Let me take it first. So Tom, normally when you talk about job process and people and stuff, you talk about anchors. You didn't mention anchors. Is that not important anymore? All right. Thanks for asking that. I love it when my clients remind me of what my content is, and this was a good example of that. Okay, anchors. So I talk about anchor positions all the time, and this is an appropriate time to bring this up. An anchor position is a person who has to be at a position, has to be in position in order to do their job effectively. Therefore, we need to engineer them into that position all the time. The example I use, I tell the story about the trucking dispatcher that worked for a client of mine. He had a lot of trucks in the field, and he had a really bad habit of scheduling every truck out, and then when there was an emergency, hopping in a truck himself, which means we no longer have a dispatcher, which would create a problem when the next trucking need came up. So a trucking dispatcher in this organization, we designated that an anchor position. They were not allowed to leave their station to go solve a problem. They had to find somebody else to do it, up to and including the owner of the company. Anybody that could drive a truck, make a delivery, put a piece of equipment in the back of their car was supposed to do this before the dispatcher left. The dispatcher is the last person, last man goes down with the ship. That is an anchor position. We have a lot of people in our organizations that need to be anchors and need to be there. Remember the beginning of the webinar, I asked about how many people are in your office on the busiest day of the year. All the people that should be there are anchors. So your warehouse manager should be there. You should have some warehouse crew there. You should have a driver who's dispatchable when you're busy. You need some management there to make decisions. We always need somebody from accounting to do financial transactions and things like that. So we actually have a lot of anchor positions, even in a small company. So we don't want to drain the entire office to go out and service jobs. I actually watched a client almost destroy their company because they kept taking the entire office and sending them to shows because they thought they were saving money by doing that, when in fact all they were doing, which you guessed it, was introducing constraints and limiting, bottlenecking their growth, making it impossible to do business. It's very hard. Salespeople are technically anchors. They should always be a salesperson because you need to be selling the next job even while you're in the middle of the job you're on. So a salesperson who also makes himself a integral to the actual delivery of the show by being the show director or the project manager or the video director or whatever job they love to do, is actually doing a disservice to your organization by going around their anchor position. They need to remain in sales so they can work on the next job. So thank you for reminding me about anchors. This is a great place to talk about anchors. We can look at primary hats as anchor positions. And how do we keep that person in position? All right. Question here is, Tom, can you outsource a primary hat? Not all primary hats, but there are primary hats that there's a few jobs that you need to retain. You really need an employee doing it. Fred, the design engineer, is a good example. However, I can outsource design engineering. I can outsource sales. I can outsource project management. There's really nothing I can't outsource. Some things are just more difficult to outsource and do well. Outsourcing a warehouse manager, let's think about that. That's hard. You've got detailed processes that are normal in your organization. It's really hard to find somebody outside to do that, to come in and take over. But having said that, you can outsource a primary hat. Let's say a network administrator, that's a primary hat. If your network goes down, somebody's got to be on it. And while outsourcing somebody may not be as efficient as having somebody in the building chained to a desk, if the person that you have chained to the desk actually needs to be doing something more valuable, it's a problem, right? So having somebody that you can call on speed dial or whatever to deal with network problems is probably a better answer than having your most valuable player having to drop what they're doing, which, oh, by the way, is very valuable, and having them take care of a network issue that you could have easily outsourced. And let's see, the questions slow down, so I got one more question here, and if nothing else pops up, we'll let you go early. Good for you. Okay, what if we have someone who won't let the job go? All right, this email goes on quite a bit, and this is the, what if we've told our boss this and he won't do anything about it type of questions. So the summary is, what if somebody won't let something go? I'm going to answer this question in the context that the person asking is actually management. You're part of the leadership of the organization, and you have an employee who's resistant to change. Let's just be polite about it. All right. What you need to do, in your role as a leadership, you have an opportunity to do the 5 whys. 5 whys means if you ask the question 5 times, if you ask the question why 5 times, you'll generally get to what the heart of the issue is. And it's not that you sit there and go, why? That's not the point of the exercise. The point is to drill down. Typically, when you ask the question, why, and keep asking it, you'll get to the heart of the matter. And it's one of several things. I think I touched on it earlier in a slide. Maybe it's their whoopee. Maybe it's, it's just the thing that makes them happy, and it's a way for them to take a break during the day. Maybe it's they don't think anybody else will do it, or they're jealous of the person who would take it over because they're a professional rival. You need to get to the heart of the matter, because that's a behavior you can address. We don't fix people's personalities. As a matter of fact, people's personalities are what they are. There's nothing we can do about that, but we can address the behavior. And the behavior says is that when you put your personal opinion about somebody else in the way of doing what's right for the company, that's a problem. This is an example of you doing that. So can you figure out how to set your personal opinion aside and do what's right for the organization? All right. So you have to address the behavior. But first ask the why 5 times. sometimes these people will tell you, and this is a common problem, that they really lament that the company's gotten so much bigger. I like it when it was smaller. I'm trying to keep the company small. I think we're growing too fast. I don't think we have things under control. This is at the bottom of a lot of whys. What folks need to understand as organizations grow, and let's face it, if you're not growing, you're dying. So growth is not a bad thing. We just have to learn how to do it better. When companies grow, job descriptions are going to get narrower. So you may have worn 20 hats when there were 5 employees and you're doing, $1.5 million a year worth of business, but now you've got 50 employees and you're doing $20 million worth of business. You can't wear the same hats. Your job description has to get narrower. You may have been operations manager one time and done all the sub rentals and the purchasing and hired the crew and booked the travel and scrubbed the orders and went to client meetings. But today, because of the size of your organization, all you can do is 1 or 2 of those jobs. And that's hard for some people to have a job that is that narrow. They feel like, I'm on an assembly line. I'm doing the same thing every day, day in and day out, which is where the judicious selection of secondary hats will help you. So help show them how many of the things that they like to do from time to time. Hey, you're on the CapEx committee. We get to have the meetings about CapEx. You're still going to be the influencer there. You're still our audio expert. So we still want you involved in decisions about audio equipment and what we use. I still need you to come to a meeting occasionally, but these are all going to be secondary hats. So we can help them, get across the threshold and see what life's going to be like at the other side. But the first thing we need to do is identify where we have an inadequate or inequitable distribution of hats so that we can start addressing all of this. So that brings me to a couple of conclusions here. If you can limit the primary hats on key individuals, you're going to free up high ROI capacity, very valuable capacity. You want to free them up. High-level people will do high-level things. Even if they say they have more time, they will devote that time to things that are more valuable if we can get rid of some of these secondary hats. Managers in particular have to let go of conflicting hats because a manager's job is to remove obstacles. And if they're busy doing a primary job that they can't turn away from, then they're not in a position to help their employees and direct reports remove obstacles. Okay, managers are there to help employees be more efficient. They're not there to do the work. And the bigger your company, the better you'll understand this. In small companies, managers are, now I was operations manager at the company and I was still doing a couple $1 million a year in sales, but as the company got bigger, I had to do less and less than that. And math is your friend. Okay, if you know the value of the employee and the task, then math is your friend, whether you're trying to solve your own hat problem or you're trying to help an employee understand how to solve their hat problem. Do the math. It'll give you some surprising results. Math doesn't lie. It's much harder to argue with, and hopefully you'll get the progress that you need. So let me just say thank you, everybody, for joining us. I appreciate you being here. If your friends did not attend and they registered, they'll get the link. You'll certainly get the link to the archive if you want to watch this again or share it with some other folks, or you want to tape somebody down to a seat and force them to watch because they don't have time to do this sort of thing. Maybe they're the ones that should be watching. So if you got any more questions, don't hesitate to email me, and I'll see you guys in Dallas at the Operations Workshop. Have a great day. Bye-bye.